Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. We are being heard by the whole world. We must guard what we say, and law, facts, and conscience must constitute the guards. Honorable Speaker, hunger can be cured, but we are told that COVID-19 cannot be cured. So we are talking about two different things, and we must focus on what is before us. Last night I spoke to someone who was in Sierra Leone, and he said when they announced that Ebola was a killer, there were many doubters. But when the nurses and doctors started to disappear, no one was there to take care of the ill. And when imams started to disappear, many people began to abandon their relatives, and they became untouchable. And that's when national action had to be taken to deal with such a terrible tragedy. This time, the world wants to avoid such a scenario, and that is why it is considered a pandemic, and the world should act together and learn from each other as we act to defeat what can be a terrible tragedy, not only for our country, for humanity at large. That is how serious it is. The Attorney General came to us to request for a state of emergency to be extended to 90 days. That is the issue. We charge our committee with the responsibility of looking at the issues so that what we do is in line with law. What we do will take charge of the facts on the ground so that we can act as one nation to deal with the problem. And that is what this session is all about. Honorable Speaker, the committee has told us that in terms of the declaration, that there are two proclamations made on the different section of Section 34. The concern is clear, Honorable Speaker, and we should come to terms with what is said, and hopefully in the final statement of the Attorney General to put certain matters behind us. Page 3, paragraph 8, the committee tells us that on the 27th day of March, a second proclamation was made. When we look at the statement of the Attorney General, the first page also told us that the President declared a state of public emergency on Friday, 27 March 2020. But when we look at the actual act itself, the gazetted proclamation, we have said that it is issued on the 26th day of March 2020. And when we look at Section 34, the President may at any time by proclamation publish in the Gazette. So it is important that we tidy up the dates so that we know that the proclamation is 26th. It's published on the 26th, so that whatever we write should actually reflect that. But the Attorney General should be able to clarify. Honorable Speaker, the point that is of importance to me that the Attorney General needs to stress on and clarify once and for all is that Section 34(1) A and B, of course, one is talking about a state of public emergency. The other is that the state of public emergency may come into existence. So he's talking about what may be and what is. And of course, the two provisions are different. But Honorable Speaker, two things are important here. After declaring the state of emergency, regardless of the two provisions, what should follow? And what is of relevance to this National Assembly? And this is where we need to tidy it up, and then we'll move with speed. Honorable Speaker, subsection 2 asserts, and I don't need to read it, the Attorney General knows what is there, that when it comes to the session of the National Assembly being in place, then whatever is proclaimed lapses in 7 days. But if the National Assembly is not in session, it goes to 21 days and it lapses. Every proclamation is followed by something that is relying on the Emergency Act to be able to come up with regulations. And this is where the Honorable Attorney General needs to become very clear to us so that we agree on points. Looking at what is gazetted, the proclamation, we are told that the President, going further, now therefore I, Adam Barrow, President of the Republic of the Gambia, on, goes further to say, hereby order the taking of the following additional measures. This is the President moving away from proclamation of a state of emergency to actually tell us the measures that he has taken. And this measures goes further to indicate all non-food outlets in all markets and enclosed shops, enclosed shopping areas shall immediately be closed. And people were hearing this. And it means, this is now the regulation. And Honorable Speaker, I don't want to waste because we are dealing with an emergency, but read all the terms. It goes even further at the end to say, all the number of people attending social gatherings such as weddings, naming ceremonies and funerals shall be restricted to a maximum of 10 people. But then when you go to the closing and restriction of non-essential public places, it talks about 5 people being. So I think, Honorable Speaker, we need not go into the details. But what I'm emphasizing here is the fact that the starting point is to make a proclamation of a state of emergency. And to me, the President should not make any pronouncement regarding the measures. That the measures come by relying on the Act, which actually indicates what should be done. And the Act goes further to indicate what should be done. That when an emergency proclamation is in force, the President may, subject to the Constitution, make such regulations. We are talking about subsidiary legislation. He can make regulations. And those regulations must also be published in the Gazette. We are given this, that these are the regulations. We have a date. Our committee has looked into them, the 4 regulations, but essentially it mentions, but the date that is here is 31st March. for the date of the regulations. That's when they were published. Honorable Speaker, the issue of 18 March came into being because of the fundamental question that mere proclamation is not enough. It should be followed by a regulation to be able to enforce. What were the regulations made under the 18 March proclamation? And what was being enforced? By who? That's why the matter was referred to the committee to review whether anything was being enforced. And if nothing was being enforced, then it was just a mere proclamation without enforcement provisions. And this one, we are being told that yes, a proclamation is made, but now these are the provisions that are required to regulate. That is the clarification that the Honorable Attorney General needs to make so that the issue will be very clear to us in terms of technicalities. Honorable Speaker, what is significant is the issue of whatever is proclaimed, whatever is provided as regulation should be reasonably justifiable in a democratic society. Not that conditions cannot change, but even if conditions change, responding to those conditions must be reasonable and justifiable. And under the regulation, Honorable Speaker, it is very clear, Section 5 of the regulation states very clear that all emergency regulations, if not sooner revoked, shall cease to have effect when the emergency proclamation in pursuance of which they have been made ceases to have effect. So if 18th March up to the end and it lapses, whatever is done in terms of regulation, once it lapses, becomes null and void. That's what is being said here. That's why the position was being emphasized, that this is teamwork between the executive and the National Assembly. That the lapses is to restrict the power exercised by the presidency, and then to cooperate with the National Assembly for extension. That is the teamwork that is required by the law. And going further, Honorable Speaker, it says, emergency regulation shall not have effect during a period when an emergency proclamation is enforced by virtue of not having been approved by a resolution of the National Assembly under Section 34 of the Constitution, or extended by a resolution of the National Assembly under Section 34 of the Constitution, unless the National Assembly has, by a like resolution in such case, affirmed that those regulations shall have effect during that period. So clearly, the National Assembly is a partner of the executive in this regard, and that they should assist the National Assembly, Honorable Speaker, to understand how it should carry out its powers to avoid delay. This is why the matter was referred to our committee, and within a short period of time, the consultation has taken place. Executive and the legislature working together to try to make sense of what is before us. And instead of delaying the process, we can hear members saying 45 days is okay, 30 days, at least horse trading is taking place, so that we may be able to make a speedier decision, but informed decision, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, just to come closer to conclusion, Section 34, subsection 2, indicates very clearly about the lapsing of a declaration. But what should follow? It says that once this is done, the National Assembly may support by not less than 1/3 of all the members, vote of 1/3 of the members support a resolution for extension. Once that is done, before the 7 days, it means the proclamation will continue. And Honorable Speaker, that is the best practice this Parliament should adopt and the Executive should adopt. That in case of any other declaration of public emergency, before it lapses within 7 days, The matter is brought before us so that we can continue, so that we continue to monitor the regulations and see whether they are reasonable and justifiable in a democratic society. Honorable Speaker, it goes further and further to show that we can have more and more resolution to extend. The executive is given power to revoke under subsection 3 a declaration it made. So nobody can tie the hands of the executive. It can make a declaration, but it can also revoke it. And that's why subsection 6 is applicable. Yes, it can make declaration. When it revokes it, it does not exist, it can make a declaration again. The National Assembly also can pass a resolution and also revoke its resolution. So both powers are not restricted to ensure that they take track of the situation. And when a particular situation no longer exists, they can revoke the emergency because it is a state of emergency. It's not a state of permanence. It is dictated by a situation, and that's what we are trying to understand, Honorable Speaker. That concluded, Honorable Speaker, we'll move to our recommendations by the committee. Honorable Speaker, in terms of the regulations, yesterday I went quickly to know the content, and I made my test trials by calling some people who are shopkeepers and said restriction on open markets and shopping area emergency powers regulation. What was declared with the proclamation by the President had a different interpretation. Some said mosques are being closed, so many things were there. But looking at this particular one, I saw that, well, the market will be open at 6 a.m. and will close at 2 p.m. But only those who are selling food items will be there. Non-food items, they will not be allowed to open up. Well, initially, people were going to shopkeepers and closing those shops. But then looking at the regulation, it's saying 100 meters from the markets, those shops can open up. Whether food or non-essential, they can open up. But then when they open up, they should make sure that they respect the social distancing. That people who come in to buy should not be more than 2 people. And when they sit, it should not be less than 2 meters. Okay, maybe we'll change the terminology of social distancing and say maybe save, maybe even save spacing. Safe spacing of human beings. We must inject certain understanding that this belongs to the people. It's their safety. I tested it with people and told them what they want is meet a safe distance, because they are saying that this virus, when the person coughs, it cannot move that distance. It will fall. So it will not get to your nostrils. So it will not infect you. It's easy to explain that to somebody and the person understand. But is that also a fact? Are we being taught? Because we are not the experts. Is it the 2 meters that is required? Could it be less? That is what the knowledge we need to have in order to make sense of the regulation. And Honorable Speaker, some people in the mosque ask me if people who are selling can keep the 2 meters and still sell for their survival. I, the spiritual leader who believe in my prayers, should I be stopped from opening my mosque and then meet the same distance so that we know that in this mosque, this is the distance that is required, so that only this number of people, and where they are paying, this is the distance they should keep. Why should that be prevented? People are thinking. So you explain what is there scientifically based on the recommendations of the health officials, but you interpret it in terms of social application in all measures to avoid any form of discrimination, which means that if that is the distance that is required, then in all social engagements, in all theater, that is the distance that should be maintained. and the activity will be able to continue. Therefore, you will have uniformity of interpretation of the regulation as well as its application, and in that regard, no social stress, no confusion will be created, and people like us who are National Assembly members who should go to our constituencies to explain to our people why this pandemic must be addressed will be given the weapon to be able to do that. So, Honorable Speaker, all the regulations should move in that direction. You cannot just come out 5 people, 10 people. What does that mean? So it means that the health officials must guide the formulation of the regulation, because this is an emergency powers dealing with a health threat, not political threat. This has never happened in this country, maybe rarely in any part of the world. This is a new element. And therefore, we need to be given the weapons to be able to handle it, so that we will not create any confusion or misunderstanding in terms of what is being done. Honorable Speaker, it goes into essential commodities. It should be well defined. It should go into public transportation. All the measures that are being taken. If you said this is the space that should be met in the transport, we should be able to explain why. The economic consequences must actually be computed. And what should be done about it from the angle of the state. Is it an angle of tax rebate for those people who own those vehicles at GRA, if they are properly registered by virtue? So what do we do to compensate at the level of the state? That becomes very important to deal with the problem. People are talking about businesses closing down, because even the microfinancial institution will say, well, since you cannot sell, why should I give you any credit? But is that what the regulation is saying, that people cannot sell? So it is important then that we go back to basics, to understand that the proclamations are made and the minds of the public should not be prejudiced by adding other elements in the thing that deals about regulation, but then the act to rely on to come up with the regulation, and the regulation should actually, we're having the subsidiary legislation committee. Really, it is time that we constituted. We delayed the last time in the composition, but we should waste no time in doing that and consulting with the Attorney General, so that ultimately what we provide in our standing orders will actually put in the interpretation act or wherever they believe that it is better put, so that we implement that, so that even subsidiary regulation will come and we speed up the process, that there will be no delay. It can be a day's matter, whatever, so that we make sure that it carries the spirit of the Parent Act and why those powers were given. If we do that, we will not be running into the problems that we are having. Clearly, Honorable Speaker, I will conclude by saying that 90 days is not ideal for the state, it's not ideal for the National Assembly, because we don't even know what we are going to do within those 90 days. What we know is a pandemic is confronting us. Social spacing, safe spacing, health spacing is necessary. Cleanliness is necessary. And therefore, how do we reorganize our whole society to ensure that whatever we do, we primarily take into consideration in preventing this illness from spreading, because it cannot be cured. So how the regulations help us to do that is what the Attorney General and those who provide the basis of such subsidiary legislation should assist us to do. And how to educate our population is what the health authorities should do. And how to compute the economic consequences is what is required, because the force must be there, the task force must be there with the competence, multi-sectoral, looking at the economic implication. How many drivers are on the road? Take the transport for a whole day. Monitor some of them. Register them. Get the statistics. How much were they earning? How much are they earning now by virtue of the situation? Look at the losses. It must be a cost-benefit analysis. The experts are there. That is what should be done. And we should make them come and report to us what their findings are. And I believe if we do that within 30 days, We'll give them the opportunity to do all the tracking that is necessary in all the elements that are significant, talking to religious leaders, talking to everybody to see what their complaints are and how they're conducting themselves, to see whether the space that is given for them to utilize what is regulation, to implement it, is actually serving the purpose. How can they respond to it? If they are religious leaders, could everybody who goes to a mosque make sure that they quantify the number, they indicate the number of people who will go to a mosque or church, to ensure that that mosque take only the space that is required for the 2 meters, but that also you take your own mat so that you pray on it, because you can pray on the ground and leave it there, somebody come and pray and then take it along. So what do you do? And how do you disinfect the place? We are creating measures. This is the response. The response is action. Is changing mindset so that the people know what to do. It's not hoping that just by regulation all problems are solved. What do we do with the regulation to prepare to change mindset, to prepare to change way of life, to prepare to change conduct? Honorable Speaker, that is what we are here to do. And for me, 30 days is sufficient in the first instance, because we can come again to deal with another resolution and move on. But within the 30 days, we expect a report of all the facts that are required so that we know what is the next step to take. Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker.